Well, good afternoon to you all. My name is Steve Kosub. I'm the Water Resources Attorney with the San Antonio Water System. I'm very grateful to Mr. Aaron, Ms. Martinson, the Planning Committee for the invitation this afternoon. I'm grateful to all of you for taking the time to share a few minutes with me. Congratulations to you for your selection as being a director of the Groundwater District. You have been entrusted in that role with governance of a groundwater district, probably one of the most important agencies the state has at this moment, whether we all realize it or not. So what does that mean? What do we mean when we talk about governance? Let's see if we can get this moving. Should I do it here?
It might be turned off.
Thank you. One more time, sorry. Governance is defined by,
Yeah, you might have to show here.
which one do I do?
This one.
Right here. Governance is defined by the Oxford dictionaries as the action or manner of governing. Well, that seems pretty straightforward, right? So why is this so hard? I will tell you that within the last month in Bexar County alone, we have had one small city government mired in controversy in its effort to remove one of its sitting council members. We have another small city government with a city council that's mired in controversy, council member versus council member versus staff, staff versus public, public versus council member, criminal indictments, civil lawsuits, all while the city's business isn't being done. We have a school district that's under supervisory control of the State Board of Education, another that's moving in that direction. They're all different in the sense that they're school districts or cities and not water districts, but I will tell you they all are very similar in terms of the problems and the nature of the really solution. So what's the foundation for your role? The Texas Constitution tells us that districts, groundwater districts, shall be governmental agencies and bodies politic and corporate with such powers of a government and with the authority as may be conferred by law. I'm sorry, going the wrong direction. The Texas Water Code digs a little deeper. The governing body of a district is the board of directors. Well, that's you. So what principles guide this work of governing? What are some of the practices that put these principles into effect? I will tell you that there's been lots of literature on this subject, lots of books written on the subjects of governing, lots of papers. There are some different ideas about what is important in governing and what is not. Steve was kind enough to talk about my work at SAWS and some work in the private sector, but I will tell you in the course of my law practice for 45 years, I've also represented local governments really since the inception of that practice. And I once calculated in the course of that time, I've attended something in excess of 2,000 meetings of councils, boards, or commissions, all very similar in nature to the meetings and the boards of which you participate. And again, the themes are very, very similar. In my opinion, these are the key principles of governing. And I'm sorry if this sounds simplistic. You may be thinking, who is this lawyer from the San Antonio Water System sitting here talking to me about these things? And they are simplistic, but they are so very, very important and so very central to your success as a board member and the success of your district. I characterize the most important principles as integrity, leadership, transparency, accountability, and fairness. Integrity, being honest, fair, and independent. Honoring not only the letter, but the spirit of the law. Recognizing, declaring, and managing conflicts of interest, and that will be very personal to you. And doing the right thing. Again, you're saying, really? You're telling me to do the right thing? Well, sometimes it's not as easy as you might think. Although I will suggest that if you can just step back from the hubbub, step back from the noise, listen to your heart, listen to your brain, listen to your conscience, the right thing will generally emerge pretty clearly. Leadership, establishing policies and strategic goals, providing the necessary resources to achieve those goals. And I want to talk about that. It's easy to say what's important to you, but you in the role of a district director will have the unique opportunity to pass a budget. And I have to tell you, there's nothing more exciting to me after 45 years of working with local government than local government budgets. They're not like the national budget, which is fake. It just doesn't mean anything to anybody. It has no reality. The government can print money. But state government and local government can't do that. When you adopt the local government budget, you have to make choices based on the dollars you have, and those choices will say what your priorities are. Those choices will say what your goals are. And you cannot criticize your staff for not achieving your stated goals if you have not given your staff the resources to achieve that task. Monitoring and evaluating the achievement of goals. This is an open process, not a secret process. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, you're going to succeed, and you're going to fail. But you're doing the work of the public, and the public has a right to know all of those things. And finally, supporting the staff and holding them to account as a board, and I'm going to talk more later about the qualifier. Transparency, conducting the public's business in public. You work for the public, you represent the public, the work you do is the public's business, and they have a right to know what that work is, to know how it's going, to see it done in public. Absolutely essential to your task. Regular and effective communication with stakeholders. You have to define your stakeholders, but I will suggest to you that it's a pretty broad group. Your stakeholders include the public as a whole, the staff, permit holders, vendors, environmental community. Everyone who has an interest in the work that you do is a stakeholder. And they all have an equal right to see and know the work that you are conducting on their behalf or in their interest. And finally, responding to stakeholders' questions and concerns. Again, be open, be accessible, be available to these people. Where you got it right, tell them. Where you got it wrong, tell them, because no one expects you to get it right all the time. Accountability, fair and clear disclosure of success and failure. Be public about this. It's okay if you fail. You're going to do that. You weren't trained for this position very much until you got here today. So no one expects you to be perfect, but everybody has a right to know how things are going. Internal financial controls. Hard to overstate this one. This is a very specific requirement that you have as a member of a board. You're responsible for a bunch of money. And when that money disappears or is spent badly, you're the party responsible. Basic things like budgets, audits are all your responsibility to ensure that they happen. And finally, risk assessment and management. Don't do your work blindly. Know what's facing you. Know what the risks ahead are. Know how you're going to tackle those risks and how you're going to manage those risks as they occur. Fairness. Boy, this one's tough. Impartial and unbiased treatment of stakeholders. Probably the ones you're going to like the least are the ones that may be the noisier, but they're your stakeholders, and they have the right to impartial and unbiased treatment. And ultimately respect for the due process of law. The process built into our system is a beautiful thing. Our legal system is a beautiful thing. It deserves your respect, and it can only operate with your respect. So what are some practices that put these principles into effect? Well, I could talk to you for a very long time, but I'm going to try to hit in our very short time this afternoon a few of the things that I think are the most significant pitfalls that you will face, the most common difficulties, in fact, the most common failures by governing boards and their directors. This first one is sort of tough to get your arms around because you ran for office, you were elected as an individual, you campaigned as an individual, you've spoken to your constituents, and you may think they expect certain things from you. But the fact of the matter is, the Texas Water Code defines no role for a board member. There is no such thing as a board director doing something. As a member of the board, you function as part of a board which is a collective entity and functions only as a collective entity. I simply can't overstate that. A collective entity that functions as a collective entity and only as a collective entity. You exist as a board to act together, not as individuals. Whether you like the person sitting next to you, whether you don't like them, whether they tried to remove you from office last week or try to remove you from office next week, it doesn't matter. When you're on that dais, and when you're not on that dais for that matter, you act as a collective entity and not as individuals. This requires, at a very minimum, that you discuss the business of the public in public to the maximum extent possible. And we could have a whole other workshop on the Texas Open Meetings Act, such an important law. Lots of ways to get it around it if you're so inclined, but I hope you won't be, because you're there for the public, it's their business, and it should be conducted in public. And ultimately, you as a board can act only through a vote taken in public. There's no such thing as board action that didn't occur with a vote in public. It simply is a void act if it occurred. There is no such thing, no way for you to act other than as a board acting in public through a publicly made vote. Second critical principle. An effective board of directors knows its role. You will focus on policy, strategic goals, and results. Governance and management are different. And this is going to really be painful for some of you to take to heart. You have not been elected to manage the staff. You have been elected to govern the district. Governance is the responsibility of the board. Management is the responsibility of your staff. And maintaining that distinction requires judgment, respect, and a great deal of restraint. And I will tell you, of the 4 incidents I just cited in the Bexar County papers within the last 2 months, all of them involve this failure of boards to recognize that they are not there to manage the staff, they are there to govern the entity. The board supervises the general manager. The general manager supervises the staff, and those roles must be respected. The board should speak to the general manager with one agreed voice. And I will tell you that if you choose to spend your days in the general manager's office, bending his or her ear with your concerns and your issues and your thoughts as to how the district should be run, the general manager will almost certainly spend the time necessary to listen to you. But every minute spent listening to you is a minute not spent taking care of the district's business, which the general manager is charged to do. The general manager, on the other hand, must ensure that the board is fully informed. The board should not engage in administration. Two-way communication is absolutely essential. This is another simple one that causes no end of issues. Board meetings must be efficient and effective. This is how you act in your meetings and only in your meetings. So it's got to work, right? What does that mean? Well, some really basic things. You need a comfortable and accessible facility within which to conduct your business. If it's hot, if it's cold, you're not going to be at your best. The public's not going to be at their best. The facility has to work. Your meetings have to be conducted at a reasonable time. What does that mean? Well, you'll have to decide for your area. I will give you some thoughts of my own. My favorite city council meeting that I used to attend was in a silk stocking community here in Bear County. They like to meet at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, that was great. Boy, I could stop by on the way to work. Coffee was perking, everybody was chirpy and nice, and the meetings were good, and we were out pretty quickly. It was great for me, probably great for the board, but it probably wasn't the greatest thing in the world for the public, or for in most communities, people who have to go to work or take care of children are not going to be available at 8 in the morning. So a lot of districts have their meetings at 7 and 7:30, just like a lot of cities do and a lot of other boards. Well, in my mind, that's the worst time. Why? Because at 7 or 7:30, you're tired, the public's tired, and quite frankly, a whole lot of people are going to be liquored up by 7 or 7:30. And you're going to have meetings that run on interminably, that are hostile, that are ineffective. In my mind, not the best. After 40 years, what do I think is the best time for your meetings? 5 or 5:30. Maybe not the greatest thing in the world, but you're coming home from work. Everybody's still reasonably fresh. Nobody's been drinking. Everybody's anxious to go home and have dinner so you can get your business done and generally have a pretty effective meeting. But again, what works for you is what's important. Figure that out. Your agenda needs to be manageable, not too long. You're human. You've got limits on your ability to absorb these details. Most important, and perhaps the simplest, you as a board member need to be there. You haven't been elected to stay home. You've been elected to do the public's business. So you've got to be present to do that. You also have to be prepared. You need to be prepared in advance. You need to know what's going to happen at the meeting. You need to have read your documents, done your homework. If your general manager is not getting that information to you in a timely manner, that's an issue for you to resolve with general manager. But there's no point of being in the meeting if you're not prepared for the meeting. And finally, you need to be engaged in your job. Respectful dialogue between board members and between board and staff. My goodness, how often is this violated? What's more important than respect for your colleague on the dais? Respect for the people that elected you. And they're often not going to be respectful of you. That's okay. They're angry, they're upset. Your job is the same, however, maintain that level of respect for all concerned. This last one's interesting, I think, opportunity for public comment. That's been all over the board over the years. It's certainly important, and now it's required by law as of this session. So there has to be an opportunity at your meeting for the public to comment. But you know what? Some limitations are essential. They can state their case, say their piece, and go home. You can't do that. You have to remain at the meeting and continue to stay focused until your job is done. So figure out what's a reasonable time opportunity for the public to address the board and set some guidelines. Understand and utilize common rules of order. Robert's Rules of Order is the norm. There are others. Remember that in a meeting, opinions among directors will vary. All votes don't have to be unanimous. My goodness, we have differences of opinion on these are difficult issues, major issues. So you can expect some differences of opinion. It's not essential that a vote be unanimous, but once the decision is made by the board, remember you are a collective entity, and that decision should be respected and supported by all. Don't leave the meeting and hold interview on the steps of the meeting hall saying how you were against it and you know it's going to fail and you told them so in the first place. Once the board takes action, that's the decision of the board. Finally, an effective board will be educated in its role, legal duties, and responsibilities. Take full advantage of this kind of training opportunity. It's so important. If you're not getting enough at external events, bring somebody in. Ask your general manager to arrange a day of training for you and go through some of these basics to whatever extent you need to understand them. And finally, engage, utilize, and respect good legal counsel. My goodness gracious, we have a room full in the next room of good lawyers, Keith, others who are here in order to help you. Yes, they make a living doing it, but they've devoted their careers to providing the best possible advice to your organization, utilize that advice and take advantage of it. The old saying could never be more true: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So your personal accountability to the district, to your conscience, to voters, to the stakeholders, and ultimately to the law, both civil and criminal. Thank you very much.